This guy was convicted for something he didn't do. Gavin Plum wasn't famous. He had no close friends, and he certainly didn't live a life anyone would want to copy. He lived alone in a small flat in Harlow, the kind of place where even sunlight seemed hesitant to enter, as if it too wanted to avoid the man inside. By day, Plum worked as a security guard at a local supermarket, an ordinary job, an invisible man. But at night, he became someone else. Behind his computer screen, he wandered the darkest corners of the internet, spaces where twisted thoughts were treated as casual conversation. And it was there that his obsession began. Holly Willoughby. It wasn't love, it was possession. To him, Holly wasn't a person, she was a figure to be owned. He downloaded every photo, every video of her, storing them carefully like a disturbed collector. He even knew the name of her pet. Why Holly? She embodied everything he could never have: beauty, fame, adoration. But in Plum's warped mind, that didn't inspire admiration. It bred toxic envy. He didn't want to love her. He wanted to control her, or erase her. Out of loneliness, Gavin fed a twisted fantasy. If he couldn't be someone like Holly, then maybe, just maybe, he could be the one who decides her fate. And like all tragedies, it didn't begin with a scream. It began with a single click. At first, Gavin Plum was just another viewer. Each morning, he sat alone in his flat, quietly watching Holly Willoughby host her show. She was gentle, always smiling, and brought a sense of warmth to anyone watching. But to Plum, that feeling twisted quickly. He began saving photos of Holly, collecting videos, digging into the tiniest details of her private life, from her home address to her daily routines, even the name of her cat. To him, she was no longer a public figure. She was prey. His thoughts grew darker. The fantasies he once had about Holly began to distort, turning into visions of kidnapping, restraint, and total control. He didn't want to be loved. He wanted to possess. And when fantasy stopped being enough, he started looking for ways to make it real. Quietly, he slipped into the darkest corners of the internet, places where people spoke about things no one else dared to say. And there, he left a chilling message. I need someone to help me abduct a woman. The plan is already in place. Online, he never used his real name. Gavin Plum called himself Big Bear. The name sounded harmless, almost friendly, but behind it was a man quietly nurturing violent intentions. In his chats, Big Bear presented himself as someone who had a detailed plan. All he needed was a partner who knew how to act. Most people ignored him. But then, David appeared, a man living in the US claiming to be a former mercenary. He said he was ready. He had weapons. He had experience. All he needed was a target. For Plum, this wasn't a warning sign. It was the moment he'd been waiting for. His twisted dream was finally within reach. David said exactly what Plum wanted to hear. That he had kidnapped people before, that he wasn't afraid of violence, that if the price was right, taking care of someone would be easy. Plum didn't ask for credentials. He didn't need a backstory. He just needed someone to say yes. And David seemed more than willing to work from the shadows. They began planning in detail. How do we get Holly out of her house? How many people will it take to subdue her? Should we keep her alive for a few days? When should it end? And how do we dispose of the body? The conversation unfolded like they were organizing a weekend trip, except the destination was a brutal crime. Plum gathered everything: gloves, duct tape, handcuffs, even syringes. In his mind, this wasn't fantasy anymore. This was the execution phase. What he didn't know was that David wasn't a stranger at all. David was an undercover US agent, secretly recording every message, every call, and every disturbing detail Plum confessed. Plum thought he was about to step into a fantasy of total control. In reality, he had just walked straight into a trap. When police stormed his apartment, Gavin Plum didn't resist. He just stood there, as if he couldn't believe his carefully crafted plan had just collapsed. Inside, they found everything: kidnapping tools, handwritten plans, messages exchanged with David, and a detailed list of what he intended to do to Holly. Faced with all the evidence, Plum said only one thing: she was just a fantasy. But clearly, he had done everything to turn that fantasy into reality. Calling it a fantasy wasn't about remorse. It was because he couldn't bear the truth, that he had failed, that others could now see who he really was. This was classic narcissistic fragility. When the illusion falls apart, he's no longer the powerful Big Bear, just a lonely man drowning in delusion. Plum wasn't just arrested. He lost the very image he built to survive. No one is born a predator. But in Gavin Plum's case, his past reads like a twisted playbook. In 2006, Plum was investigated for harassing a woman on a train. The case didn't lead to charges, but it was the first time he got a taste of making someone feel unsafe. 2 years later, in 2008, he attacked an employee at a Woolworths store. The act was violent, sudden, and without any clear motive. It wasn't driven by anger, more like a test to see how far he could go without consequences. Then, in 2018, Plum appeared in a BBC documentary about weight loss. On screen, he came across as sensitive, likable, a man trying to turn his life around. But behind the friendly smile, he was already building a darker world, one where women weren't people, but characters in his personal horror script. When police searched his apartment, they found over 10,000 photos, images of celebrities, strangers, even hidden camera shots. Each photo was saved, sorted, and categorized with precision. This wasn't a hobby. It was a system, fueled by obsession. Plum didn't act on impulse. He was the type who tested limits, watched the results, and adjusted his behavior to stay undetected. From fake guns, he graduated to real knives. From stalking strangers, he moved on to recruiting partners for abduction. He learned how to manipulate, to hide, and to construct a fantasy world where he had total control. In the end, the court would understand. This wasn't the first script Gavin Plum had written. Only this time, it was all too real. Inside the courtroom, no one needed much time to decide. Gavin Plum sat quietly, eyes fixed on the floor, face expressionless. But inside, his world was collapsing. There was no more Big Bear, no more mastermind hiding in the shadows, just a man, stripped bare before justice. The jury returned after a short deliberation, and no one was surprised. Gavin Plum was found guilty on all counts, not for the twisted fantasies inside his head, but for what he had actually prepared. Every item, every message, every step in the plan to kidnap and kill. Although no attack ever took place, the level of planning, the deception, and the clear intent to murder were undeniable. This was a textbook case of solicitation to commit murder with intent, and this time, the justice system intervened just in time. Gavin wasn't convicted for what he did. He was convicted for what he was preparing to do. And that was enough to lock him away forever. In a cold prison cell, Gavin Plum sat alone behind bars. The walls were covered with photos, images of Holly Willoughby, clipped from magazines, screenshots from TV, and even pictures he had secretly saved from the internet. They were arranged like a twisted collection, as if he was still trying to hold on to the power he once believed he had. A single Polaroid slipped from the wall and hit the floor. Someone lit a flame to it. The small fire crept slowly across the photo, devouring the face printed on it, until nothing remained but ash.